For a couple of decades now, schools, educators and governments have begun to take bullying seriously and have put a whole raft of awareness campaigns and anti-bullying programs into place. But bullying rates have remained stubbornly high. Have we missed something? Where did we go wrong?
This is Signs of the Times Radio with Kent Kingston.
Hey, it's great to have you with us for another week of Signs of the Times Radio. And zooming in from Lake Macquarie is one of our authors, Mrs. Michaela Mathers. How are you, Michaela?
Good, thank you. Thanks for having me, Kent.
That's right. And I say Mrs. because you were married recently, so,
Yes.
Only a year or so ago, wasn't it?
Yes, just over a year now, so still getting used to it.
Well, happy anniversary.
Thank you.
So, Michaela, in your professional life, was it psychology or counselling, or can you just give us some clear definitions there?
Yeah, so I am currently working as a counsellor, school counsellor, but I'm also continuing my psychology study. So a related field, but a little bit of a separate qualification. So I'm working on I've got my Masters of Professional Psychology. I've got provisional registration as a psychologist, but that's very much still the study side of things, and my practical work is as a counsellor.
Okay, all right. So what is the situation for you with all the COVID restrictions and everything? Is the school you're working at closed down or sort of limited students? Are you able to go in, or what's going on?
So we slowly staggered students start beginning to learn from home, and then for the last little while, students have been entirely at home, and this week they've just started back. It's a smaller school, so all students have started back full-time, face-to-face learning again. In the between time, I have been not going into the school, so soon we should be looking at getting that back up and running at the school.
Okay, all right. So I guess obviously, your article is focusing on the bullying issue. It's difficult to picture how bullying could be much of an issue during these COVID restrictions. Am I right there?
Yeah, well, it would look a little bit different. Unfortunately, the risk for cyberbullying is actually increased at the moment due to kids potentially spending a lot more time on screens and social media as their way of connecting at the moment. So, yeah, there's been a lot of information going around about the things to look out for as that is a risk at the moment.
Okay, all right. I guess that there are different varieties of bullying, aren't there? Really?
Yeah.
Can you sort of give us a rundown of the sorts of things that we do define as bullying, and I guess coming into that, maybe some of the things that we might think of as bullying that really aren't?
Yeah. And you touch on a good point there. The specific definition in Australia for bullying is an ongoing misuse of power in relationships through repeated verbal, physical, and or social behaviour that causes physical and or psychological harm. So that really emphasises the point that bullying, it's not just a one-off incident or reciprocal peer conflict. So it's that the ongoing nature and the imbalance of power that really determines whether it's bullying or just poor behaviour and conflict. Cyberbullying, however, is a little bit different because it can be a one-off incident as something that's online, can happen once, but it can be shared to a much wider audience. So that one gets a little bit trickier there.
Right. And I guess in that sense, because it stays there in cyberspace, it becomes an ongoing issue, even though it might not be a repeated behaviour.
Yeah, it can be a lot more damaging. It can be more permanent. So both other people and also the recipient of the poor communication or something can keep looking at it, and then they can be hurt repeatedly by it. So
yeah. And the other aspect of the definition that you read there that I found interesting was all the different aspects of bullying that are possible. I mean, I think physical is one of them. So actual, physical assault, kids being punched or put in headlocks
Yeah.
or kicked or whatever. But what were the other types of bullying apart from physical?
Yeah, so verbal, so, making comments, name calling, that kind of thing, and social. So that can be things like, obviously that can include the verbal and the physical elements, specifically excluding one person.
There's one person in the class or in, who doesn't get invited to the birthday party, and every single other person does. When it comes to, some social event happening on the weekend, everyone else gets invited except for that person. When it comes to hanging out in the schoolyard at lunchtime, in a circle in a group and playing a game together, everyone gets to play except for this one person. So it's that repeated social isolation.
Yeah, when something like that is repeatedly happening, it can create quite that power imbalance. And that's, where that can be quite damaging in a social setting.
Okay. So I guess there are times though when, as you say, there's a one-off incident, or you don't see that sort of power difference between the parties, and nevertheless, some student will come rushing in saying such and such is bullying me. That bullying is the word that's being used. How do how do you sort of untangle that?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's really tricky. It is a word that's certainly thrown around a lot and misunderstood by parents, teachers, kids. And it does get tricky. You end up wanting to, the natural approach is, okay, we'll work out who's telling the truth. Which side of this do I believe? Is it happening both ways? Is this conflict, or is this a group attack towards one particular student? It can be really hard to work out exactly what's going on, because as soon as you talk to the other side, they might say yes, but they did this. It's very, very messy.
He said, she said, yeah.
Yeah.
And then I guess there's the issue of teachers bullying. I mean, I remember one of the schools I attended, that there was a particular, it was a high school, there was a particular teacher there who was a very large, and he was sort of, the PE teacher sometimes, a very sort of physical sort of guy. And he had a habit of getting boys down on the ground and sort of like putting his foot on their chest and sort of pushing and, kind of crushing or chucking a basketball at you very, very fast and very hard. And the interesting thing is that for some kids, they were like very sort of physical, rough and tumble kids. And I think they liked that sort of horseplay, wrestling sort of treatment. And others, I think, were quite intimidated by it. So, but I guess being a teacher, I mean, you'd think the standards would be even higher when it comes to that kind of thing.
Yeah, you would hope so. But I guess they're in that position of power, and that's where you have the opportunity, I guess, to misuse that if that's what you choose. Yeah, that it can certainly happen where the person is actually in a position of authority or, a power over somebody. And it can happen that way as well, not just between peers.
Mm-hmm. Well, I guess, like you say, the power imbalance is a thing. So it could be like an older kid in an older class, or a physically bigger kid, or just a kid with more social confidence and more, I don't know, more popularity. Do those things all count as sort of power imbalances?
Yeah, they can all create that power imbalance. As soon as, a kid with more friends perhaps, or more people around them, that can give them a bit of confidence or that sense of power over somebody who might be on their own, or, with one other friend, a bigger student, anything like that can be used to create a power imbalance.
Okay. So in recent years, probably the last decade or two, we've seen an increase in awareness of the bullying issue. We've seen various bullying campaigns in schools, different, awareness classes and trainings and things for teachers and students. In particular, we've seen an emphasis on protecting kids who are, LGBT, plus, from bullying situations. What has been sort of the thrust of a lot of these awareness campaigns and strategies and trainings, and what are kids and teachers and school and parents being taught to do differently or to watch out for?
Yeah, well, I guess the more awareness about bullying has led to maybe a bit of an over-identification of instances of bullying, I think, too. That's led to more just throwing that word around for things that maybe they don't realise don't actually meet the definition of bullying. And the more information we have about the mental health and the physical health impacts of bullying, I think has made people more aware of that and wanting to get onto it quicker. And that's the good intentions of all of these initiatives and education in trying to put a stop to it. But unfortunately, the statistics are showing that it's still quite prevalent, especially in young people.
Well, what's that about, do you think? The fact that, we increase awareness, we tell kids it's bad, you shouldn't do it, this hurts people. We even have awful stories about, kids being, repeatedly like harassed online or whatever. And then they, and even people saying you should go and kill yourself. And then they do, I mean, there's some pretty horrific stories out there. How is it that people aren't getting the message, that things aren't changing? That, as you say, statistics are suggesting not bullying's as much a problem as it ever was.
Yeah. Well, I think one thing is that the vulnerabilities that make people more likely to engage in bullying behavior are really prevalent. So something that makes people more likely to be a bully is poor peer relationships, poor family relationships, family conflict. And these things are still really prevalent. That there's still a lot of kids that aren't maybe getting a good example of how do I interact with people, or they're not getting the kinds of connection and they're not sure how do I get a connection with somebody, how to have a positive relationship. And the other thing is that the instruction of all of these anti-bullying movements and programs, the main thing is usually to report to an authority, tell the parents, tell staff at school, tell them what's happened. And while in some cases that's necessary, particularly if it involves the criminal behaviour, so the physical bullying, the harm to possessions, that might need to happen. But when it's verbal bullying or social bullying, then reporting to an authority creates hostility, really, because then the authority comes in and has to go, okay, I've got to investigate. What's on this side, what's on that side. And this is actually creating hostility rather than going, okay, how do we actually resolve conflict?
Yeah, I have to admit, I always found this really confusing growing up, this mixed message that you get as a kid, hey, I'm the authority, say it says a parent or a teacher. I'm here to, mediate conflicts. If you have anything that's on your mind, you can tell me. But then on the other hand, when you start as a child, when you start sort of saying, hey, I've been treated unfairly here, it's like, oh, you're a dibber, and then amongst the, even the parents and the teachers will say that. And even amongst kids, especially amongst kids, you get this, don't be a tattletale, don't be a dibber, snitches get stitches,
Yeah.
It's sort of almost like a prison mentality, it's us against the screws sort of thing.
Yeah.
It's weird. Do you know what I mean in terms of that mixed messages, that mixed message that we get?
Yeah, it's so true. Your peers are telling you don't do that. That's going to create conflict with us. And then the authorities, your parents, teachers are saying, no, tell us. We want you to tell us. It does create more conflict there. And I think one of the factors that perpetuates that is that if the adult doesn't know what to do to help, and that is super common because they're like complex, tricky situations, it can be hard to know, okay, how do I actually help these kids solve a problem?
Yeah.
And some parents, out of, they might be hurt by what their child's experiencing and stressed by the effect they're seeing that it's having on their child. Sometimes it can be easy if you feel like you want to fix it for them, or even as a staff at school, you want to come in and tell the other person to stop, for example, and come in and solve the problem where that isn't actually teaching them the skills of what do I actually do after, maybe after I've told somebody or before that, what do I actually do to respond to this?
Yeah. It is so complex, isn't it? And it seems that people often, I don't know, like adults give kids some really simplistic suggestions sometimes, like, just walk away, or, tell a teacher, or sometimes some parents will say, look, just give the kid who's hassling you a punch in the face and they'll never hassle you again. And the sad thing, the funny thing is that sometimes, like, walking away or telling a teacher or punching the kid in the face actually works.
Yeah.
but often it doesn't, because there are so many different situations and each one sort of has its own unique solution, and giving this sort of one simple pat answer for all bullying situations, I don't know, in some ways it creates more trouble than it solves.
Yeah. And with there being so many different types of bullying, then we really need to have different types of responses, because what works in person isn't going to work online, and vice versa. So it makes sense that, what might work in one situation or might work one time with a person might not work next time.
Yeah. So have you had much luck, Michaela, with, let's say, two kids are in a conflict, whether or not it's a bullying sort of situation, let's just say a simple conflict, and you actually have them both there in the same room. Have you had much success with helping them sort of talk it out, negotiate it out, and to the point where, you don't see a reoccurrence of that negative behaviour?
Yeah, at times. And sometimes it might just be that particular situation is resolved and something later on is still going to create conflict. But there's been times where I've seen kids be able to actually either, if it might just be in the same classroom, not have to be best friends, but be able to be around each other, or even repair a friendship. Certainly I've seen sitting down and helping them communicate, how does that make you feel? And listening to each side is really powerful.
And having them listen to each other, I guess.
Yeah, making sure, have you heard what that person says? Yes, you didn't think that you were saying that, but that's how it made them feel. And can you see how they didn't really think that they were saying that to you? Or they didn't mean to do that to you, but that's how it made you feel. And focusing on that rather than getting a right or wrong, what happened, who did what, but can you see that whatever you intended to do, that's how the person feels. You wouldn't want to feel like that. So what do you think you can do about this? Or what do you think you can do from here? Can be really powerful.
So it's about shifting the focus away from, who was right, who was wrong, who's going to get punished, who's going to get away with it, into actual empathy, understanding how this situation looked from the other person's point of view. And
as soon as they start to think, well, you're right, I wouldn't want to feel like that. And if what I'm doing is making the person feel like that, whether I mean it to or not, maybe I need to do something different. Be helpful.
Okay. Now, Michaela, in your article, you mentioned this US psychologist by the name of Izzy Kalman, and he has his own anti-bullying program, which flies in the face of a lot of the sort of received wisdom when it comes to bullying and anti-bullying. Can you just give us a bit of a thumbnail sketch of his critique and his approach?
Yeah, so Izzy Kalman, he's an American school psychologist and recognized as an anti-bullying expert, but also a very controversial one. His approach is very different to anything that we've seen before. He predicted the downfall of the anti-bullying movement to be the focus on reporting to authorities, and that if the authorities then don't know what to do, then that's not actually going to help reduce conflict.
Yeah.
So he's been criticised for victim blaming. Yeah, some people have interpreted his response of, okay, let's just teach them how to resolve conflict. Some people have interpreted that as, okay, let's focus on the victims and just let's help them get out of the situation.
Okay, because what he says, sorry, Michaela, sorry for interrupting you. What he says, Michaela, is that, hey, the reason why this person is bullying you or teasing you, if we don't necessarily want to take it to the bullying level, the reason why this other kid is hassling you is because of the reaction they get from you. When you as a kid, as the victim, like, yell or scream or cry or say, no, it's not, and get emotional, this is like a game for the bully. This is exactly the reaction they're looking for. They want that sense of power and that sense of being able to provoke a reaction. So you need to learn not to give them that reaction. And I guess I can understand why this focus on the victim's behavior could be seen as victim blaming.
Yeah, for sure. It could look like he's saying, you're making this happen, or you're making this continue.
You're bringing it on yourself.
Yeah. You're getting upset, so it's on you. An interesting distinction to make, though, is while the language he uses is a bit controversial, his approach isn't actually let's focus on the victims. His approach is actually let's focus on teaching all kids how to resolve conflict, how to handle a bullying situation or a conflict situation. And so that's actually, you would end up teaching typical bullies, victims, however you want to categorize, and often people can be both. You're actually just teaching all kids how to get along better, how to resolve conflict, and how to build positive relationships. And so if you take that, look at it a little bit more, it's a little bit more balanced in we're not just working with the victim, we're actually also working with bullies to teach them how to interact better with people.
Mm-hmm. I remember my mum telling me, she actually was a school counsellor for a while, several years back. She said that she was in a classroom one time and she asked all the kids to close their eyes and put their heads down on their desk. And I think she asked them a few questions about, to put their hands up and yes or no or whatever. But one question that she asked them was, do you feel like you're the odd one out amongst your peer group? And she says that without exception, every single kid in the class put their hand up, or at least the vast majority. It seems nearly every kid has a sense that I don't belong, I'm different. Every kid has this sense of being sensitive. And it seems to me that a clever bully is the person who's able to find that thing that you're sensitive about, that thing that makes you feel different from everyone else, and then to sort of poke that and, poke it repeatedly. I mean, sometimes a bully will poke at something that you didn't even think was an issue before. Oh, really? There's something wrong with having red hair, or there's something wrong with my dark skin, or wearing glasses, or the way I talk. You know what I mean?
Yeah. It's the differences that people become super hyper aware of. And interestingly, feeling as though you're different makes you more likely to engage in bullying behavior, but also more likely to become a victim of bullying behavior. So it's actually a factor in both sides of the story. It's something that we're all sensitive to.
A preemptive thing from a bully's point of view, that before anyone picks on me, I'm going to take the I'm going to get in first and assert myself.
Yeah, I'm going to get people on side. I've got to, not let people know that I'm actually worried about this, or I actually think it might be different.
Yeah, it's a bit of overcompensating. I guess we have heard that, haven't we? Bullies are actually the most insecure people, there are. So in terms of solutions, what does Izzy Kalman suggest is the way forward for kids who are, being bullied or bullies themselves?
So he talks about a bit of what we've been talking about, that know why you get upset, like know why they're teasing you. What are the things they're pointing on, what are the buttons they're pushing that make you react?
Mm-hmm.
And if you know what they are, you are more likely to not react when they're pushed.
Mm.
And
yeah.
This is what they're going to say, and you can build a little bit of resilience to what they might say. And you can also manage your reaction too. You might get upset inside or walk away and be upset, but you can manage your reaction to the person, because like we touched on before, the game is whoever gets mad first loses. So reacting to the bully is what goes, I got the button, I found it, and I know where to push it again.
Yep. Okay. And Kalman seems to come up with a fairly unique approach in, I guess you could call it a sort of a judo approach in kind of absorbing teasing comments by accepting them in some ways, and sort of, saying, and it's no big deal. Some kid one kid says to another, "Oh, you're fat," or whatever, and the kid just says, "Yeah, I probably need to go on a diet. Yeah, it's a bit of a struggle," and just accepts it calmly, and that seems to kind of take the wind out of the bully's sails. Is that the way you understood his technique, or part of it?
Yeah. He says his humour a lot to respond and to help not only the person not internalize what's being said, but also to take away that reaction that rewards the person for getting the response.
Mm-hmm. And the other really interesting aspect I found, just checking up some of Izzy Kalman's stuff, is that he mentions the golden rule, and I'm judging by his name and by some of the publications he's written for, I'm guessing he has a Jewish background, and it's interesting to hear him sort of using this quite New Testament idea, these words of Jesus, the golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Although I believe it's also been said, many of the world's major religions have a similar concept. But yeah, did you find that interesting?
Yeah, I found that really fascinating. I think something I found particularly fascinating was that both of these approaches, both Izzy Kalman and the golden rule, the approach is positive statements. So what you should do this, treat people how you want to be treated, build resilience, be aware of what makes you upset, be aware of how you can respond to not encourage the other person to keep going. And same as the golden rule is do this. And using these positive statements is actually quite empowering, rather than just saying, don't do this, don't bully, don't do this. So a really fascinating thing that happened at the school, we were doing an activity to promote awareness about bullying, but focusing on how to resolve conflict. How can you show empathy to other people? How can you get along? And all of the students could tell me all of the classic punchlines of, don't bully, we don't tolerate bullying, all of these lines, and then go to do the colouring in page and argue about what colour textures they wanted to use and have trouble sharing out the pencils. And
theory and practice, eh?
Yeah, and it was a great time to talk about this and go, yeah, we know the big statements, don't bully, don't do that, but how do we actually get along? How do we actually negotiate when we're not agreeing, or we don't see things the same way? And I think that when we look at it that way, these positive statements, do this rather than don't do this, you can actually give people a sense that I'm not a victim of something. I'm in a tricky situation, and I can work out what I can do to help make myself feel better and also to help get along better with people. I think that's quite a powerful way of presenting this idea in the anti-bullying movement.
Wow. Hey, thanks so much, Michaela. You've really given us something to think about and some great practical tips along the way there. Yeah, thanks for being part of Science Radio this week.
Thanks for having me, Kent.
Today's episode was based on an article appearing in this month's Science of the Times magazine. A subscription is just $26 for 11 issues a year. To find out more, visit scienceofthetimes.org.au. Science of the Times has been published in Australia since 1886 and is proudly produced by Adventist Media.
This is an Adventist Media podcast.